What if I told you that one of the most revered festivals in ancient India involved honoring the dead in the most unexpected ways? You might think of it as a somber ritual, but the truth is far stranger than that. Imagine the scene: a massive procession, families gathering with offerings of food and clothes, but something else is going on beneath the surface. This was the Festival of the Dead, and it wasn't just about honoring ancestors. It was about keeping the dead from returning to wreak havoc on the living. The belief was that during this time, the spirits of the deceased would wander back into their families' lives, checking in on them, and if not properly appeased, they might cause chaos or misfortune. Strange, right? But it gets weirder. To make sure the spirits didn't get any funny ideas, the rituals were a lot darker than you might expect. Yes, there were offerings, but the true nature of the festival involved misdirection. Mock funerals were sometimes performed to confuse the wandering souls. By staging these fake ceremonies, it was believed that the spirits would be tricked into thinking their loved ones were still mourning their passing, thus preventing them from returning. The deceased weren't just honored, they were tricked into thinking their families had moved on, allowing the living to continue on their way without the dead causing trouble. It's fascinating that these ancient people went to such lengths to ensure that the spirits didn't return angry or vengeful. It wasn't just about respect for the dead, it was about control, protection, and peace. In a world where death was an ever-present part of life, these rituals must have seemed necessary for survival. And yet, there's something about the idea of mock funerals and tricking the spirits that feels so strange, so otherworldly. But these kinds of rituals weren't just about scaring away ghosts. They were also deeply connected to the people's belief in the afterlife. Ancient Indians didn't just believe in death, they believed in what came after. And it wasn't just about comforting the grieving, this was about ensuring the cycle of life and death continue peacefully. The living had to maintain harmony with the dead, because the spirits' actions were believed to directly affect the world of the living. What's even more interesting is that, despite how strange this may sound, some of these ancient beliefs still influence the festivals of today. Yes, you may see the colorful festivals of modern India, but beneath the surface, the roots go back to these eerie traditions. Could it be that we're still honoring the dead in ways we don't fully understand? In the context of modern life, you might be thinking, wait, are we still doing mock funerals? Of course, no one's holding literal mock funerals today, but the practices of remembering the dead and ensuring their spirits are at rest, that's very much alive in modern Hindu festivals like Pitru Paksha, a time when people perform rituals for their ancestors. While we've moved on from the extreme methods of the past, the spirit of respect and perhaps even trickery continues. You might be shocked by how these ancient traditions have evolved into the festivals you recognize today, such as the large-scale celebrations for ancestors and loved ones. In fact, many of these rituals, while not as extreme, still carry echoes of their ancient origins. It's a strange fact that some of the oldest and most sacred festivals in India weren't about joy or celebration. They were about survival. And if you dig deep enough into their history, you'll find the line between respect for the dead and fear of them was often razor thin. It's easy to look at festivals like Diwali and Holi, where joy and colors abound, and forget the deeper, sometimes darker, origins of these celebrations. So, next time you see an ancient Indian festival, remember, it's not just about the surface celebration. There's a lot more happening in the background, where the living and the dead are intricately connected, and where rituals that seem strange to us today were once a matter of life and death. And trust me, this is just the beginning. The craziest festivals in ancient India are even more bizarre than you can imagine. Picture this: a massive chariot towering above the crowds, being pulled by thousands of people. The flames of fire light up the night as the chariot moves through the streets, and atop it sits a deity, revered and powerful. What if I told you that in ancient India, such chariot festivals were more than just a spectacle? They were believed to carry the gods themselves. They weren't just about a divine procession, but about making the presence of the gods felt in every corner of the world. Sounds like an event you'd see in a movie, right? But this was reality in ancient India. The festival of the chariot was designed to symbolize the journey of the gods through the mortal world. It wasn't just a celebration, it was an enactment of divine power. Imagine seeing a god, not in a temple, but riding through the streets, their chariot carrying them across the city as the people watched in awe, hoping for blessings. The festival was sacred and serious, with an undercurrent of spirituality that was palpable in every drumbeat and chant. As the chariot would roll through the streets, people didn't just watch, it was a full-on participation event. People would literally throw themselves under the wheels of the chariot, believing that if they did so, they would be blessed. Picture this: the ground trembling beneath you as a giant, fire-lit chariot rumbles forward. Would you be brave enough to throw yourself under the wheels for a chance at divine favor? It might sound insane, but for the people of ancient India, it was an act of ultimate devotion, and the greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward. But it wasn't all about the dramatic actions of the devotees. The chariot itself had a deeper significance. These massive wooden constructions were meticulously crafted, designed not just to carry a god through the streets, but to represent the god's strength and power. The chariot was often adorned with sacred symbols, elaborate carvings, and other symbols of divine might. It wasn't just a ride, it was a statement, a representation of the god's presence among the people. Here's where it gets even crazier. Some of these chariot festivals would last days. Yes, days. Imagine a festival that wasn't just about a few hours of celebration, not a marathon of chanting, rituals, and processions. For days on end, people would gather to honor the gods, sacrificing sleep, food, and comfort. The energy in the air would be intense, and the atmosphere would be electric, with non-stop activity. It's hard to fathom such devotion in a modern world that's driven by instant gratification and short attention spans. But in ancient India, these festivals were a reflection of the deep connection people felt to their gods. One of the strangest aspects of these chariot festivals was the belief that the gods would leave their sacred palaces and travel with the chariot. This wasn't just symbolic. People believed the gods actually moved through their world during these events. In a sense, it was like a physical manifestation of the divine walking among the people. Imagine feeling the energy shift in the air as the divine entered the streets, crossing paths with the living. It was an event that blurred the line between the mortal and the divine. But here's the twist. The very idea of a god traveling in a chariot, riding among the people, wasn't as comforting as it sounds. While people believed it was a blessing, there was also a sense of fear and awe. After all, the gods were not always merciful. They could be vengeful, unpredictable. You never knew what could happen when divine power walked so closely among mortals. Some of these festivals were not only about receiving blessings, but also about ensuring that the gods would stay pleased, preventing the wrath of the divine from falling upon the people. However, it's hard to ignore the eerie thought that in ancient India, people didn't just celebrate their gods. They were literally placing themselves under the wheels of divine judgment. The risk wasn't just part of the ritual, it was essential. And perhaps that's what made the chariot festival so incredibly powerful. A blend of hope, fear, devotion, and sacrifice, all rolled into one overwhelming experience. But that's not all. The chariot festival was not only about the grand spectacle, it also had a communal aspect that brought people together. The entire community would come together to prepare the chariot, decorate it, and take part in the procession. The chariot didn't just represent the deity, it represented the community's unity, their collective power, and their shared devotion. It was an event where every person had a role, and the act of preparing and participating in the festival was, in itself, a form of worship. What you may not know is that these chariot festivals were also a way to showcase power and politics. Rulers would often participate, making sure to appear in grand chariots as symbols of their strength and divine right to rule. Some kings would even go to great lengths to ensure that their chariot outshone others in size, decorations, and grandeur. The competition between chariots wasn't just a contest of religion, it was a display of political might. In fact, there's a controversial aspect to these festivals. Some people believe the festivals were used as a form of control. By participating in these elaborate rituals, the people were reminded of their place in the divine hierarchy. It wasn't just about celebrating the gods, it was about reaffirming the social order, where the rulers were seen as divinely appointed, and the people were reminded of their subservience. Some may argue that these festivals, while deeply spiritual, were also used as a tool of political power and control. You might be surprised to learn that even though these festivals had deep spiritual roots, they were also incredibly dangerous. At times, people would get so caught up in the fervor that chaos would erupt. The processions were often crowded, and with the flames, chariot wheels, and thousands of devotees all in motion, accidents were inevitable. Yet this didn't deter people from continuing the practice. The belief that divine favor could be obtained was so strong that they were willing to risk everything, even their lives. But what can we learn from these ancient chariot festivals today? We might think we've come far from the rituals of the past, but these festivals were about more than just religion. They were about community, devotion, and the shared experience of connecting with something greater than oneself. In a world that often feels disconnected, perhaps there's something to be learned from the unity these festivals created. You might also be surprised to know that the idea of gods traveling in chariots isn't just something from ancient India. It has echoes in other cultures too, where gods or sacred figures would travel with great fanfare, symbolizing their power and influence over the world. These celebrations were not just about worship, they were about creating a physical, tangible connection between the divine and the mortal, and in that there's something profoundly human. As we look back at these festivals, it's clear that they were far more than just colorful events. They were spiritual spectacles, filled with danger, devotion, and divine power. And yet, in the modern world, it's hard to imagine a festival that would demand such sacrifice and devotion. What does that say about our current relationship with the divine? What if the secret to eternal life was believed to lie in offering something extreme, something that could push a person to their limits? In ancient India, immortality wasn't just something you wished for, it was something you had to earn through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Let's start by diving into the intense and grueling rites of passage that young adults had to endure. These weren't your average coming-of-age rituals. In fact, they were so extreme that they could leave you wondering, how far would you be willing to go for spiritual enlightenment? To prove their bravery and readiness for adulthood, young men and women in ancient India had to pass through trials that tested their physical, mental, and emotional limits. These trials were seen as a way to unlock their potential and prove they were worthy of divine favor. Imagine walking across a bed of burning coals, barefoot. It sounds like a stunt from a survival show, but for these young adults, it was a true test of courage. The gods, they believed, would only grant immortality to those who showed true strength and devotion. The reward? Eternal life in the presence of the divine. But here's the catch. Only those who succeeded in these deadly trials trials would achieve spiritual growth, and not everyone made it through. You might think that walking on fire sounds painful enough, but that was just one part of the trials. These rites of passage involved other extreme tasks. Individuals to meditate for days without food, sleep, or water, pushing their bodies to the brink of collapse. Others involved dangerous acts like hanging from hooks pierced through the skin, an offering of flesh that was believed to connect the devotee directly with the gods. This wasn't just about physical endurance, it was about transcending the body's limitations and entering a higher state of consciousness. But what was the driving force behind these sacrifices? You may be surprised to learn that it wasn't about proving strength alone. It was about achieving a deep connection with the divine. The people believed that the gods would look favorably on those who endured the greatest hardships, rewarding them with immortality. The idea wasn't that the gods granted life forever. It was about transcending death altogether. By surviving these trials, one would gain access to the afterlife, free from the limitations of the human body. Now let's dig into the mysterious belief that these extreme rites would not only grant immortality but also purify the soul. Through the blood, sweat, and tears of these trials, the young adults were believed to shed their mortal imperfections. It's almost as if they were reborn, ready to live in the presence of the gods. The trials weren't just physical. They were seen as a journey toward spiritual enlightenment. But here's the thing. While immortality was the ultimate goal, these trials were brutal, and many who attempted them didn't survive. Some went mad from the pain or the stress of the ordeal. It begs the question, was it worth it? And here's a rare fact that you probably haven't heard before. Some of these rites of passage weren't just about individuals. Entire communities would gather to witness these trials. The idea was that the success of one person would benefit the entire community. If a young person passed the trial, it was seen as a blessing for everyone. But if they failed, it was considered a bad omen. The community believed that their collective fate was tied to the success of these rituals. This belief tied spiritual power not just to the individual, but to the whole community. Everyone had a stake in the outcome. Now, let's talk about the controversy surrounding these practices. Some argue that these extreme rituals were used as a way to control the population. By demanding such extreme sacrifices, those in power, often priests or kings, were able to assert control over their people, making them believe that their survival and prosperity depended on following these harsh rites. The idea of immortality, after all, wasn't just a promise for the individual. It was a tool for those in power to maintain order and control. This raises a provocative question. Were these rites truly about spiritual growth, or were they a method of social control, ensuring that the people remained submissive and obedient? But despite the controversy and the dangers, there was something undeniably powerful about these rites. People believed that the gods were watching over them, guiding them through these extreme tests. And the reward for surviving, it wasn't just spiritual, it was transformative. Those who passed the trials were seen as walking closer to the divine, their souls purified and ready for eternal life. Imagine living in a world where everything you did was for a chance at immortality. Every act, every ritual, every sacrifice would be done with the belief that it would bring you closer to the gods. It's hard to wrap your head around today, but in ancient India, this was the reality. These rites were central to their belief system, shaping their understanding of life, death, and the divine. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. These rituals are not just relics of the past. Some versions of these rites, albeit less extreme, can still be seen in certain spiritual practices today. Whether it's through meditation, fasting, or other forms of devotion, the core belief remains the same, that the path to spiritual enlightenment requires sacrifice, dedication, and overcoming the limits of the body. As we reflect on these shocking and sometimes disturbing rites, we can't help but be amazed by the intensity of the beliefs that drove them. People were willing to risk everything for a chance at eternal life. But here's the big question. Were they truly seeking immortality, or were they seeking something deeper? A connection to the divine, a release from the fears of death. In the end, these ancient rituals aren't just about physical endurance. They're about understanding the profound mysteries of life and death. They push us to ask, what are we willing to sacrifice for spiritual growth? So as we look back on these rites of passage, we see how deeply people believed in immortality and the power of the gods. And while the methods may seem extreme to us now, they were a reflection of a world that was deeply interconnected with the divine. The stories of these rites are strange, but they show just how far people were willing to go for something greater than themselves. You might think of dance as a joyful, carefree celebration, but in ancient India, it was a deeply spiritual experience, often viewed as a form of devotion. What if I told you that the more intense the dance, the more favor one could earn from the gods? The dance of madness, as it was called, wasn't just about moving to a rhythm or enjoying a festive atmosphere. No, this was an experience that took people to another realm, one where the boundaries between the physical and the divine were blurred. Imagine the sight, a crowd of dancers, each one lost in a trance, moving wildly and fervently, driven by an unseen force. For them, this was not just dancing, it was communion with the gods. The belief was that during these intense dances, they were being possessed by the divine, taking on the very essence of their gods. People believed that the gods would take control of their bodies during the dance. For hours, the dancers would whirl and spin, their bodies contorting in ways that seemed beyond human control. They were believed to be divinely guided, each movement a message, a vision, or a form of spiritual release. But here's the strange part. The more extreme the dance, the greater the blessing. The most most intense movements, those that seemed like they could break the body, were seen as the most powerful. The dancers would often experience physical exhaustion, pain, and even injuries. They continued because they believed the greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward. Some dancers even claimed to experience life-changing spiritual awakenings, visions of the divine, or profound moments of clarity. The extreme nature of these dances wasn't just an act of devotion. It was believed to be the key to achieving spiritual enlightenment. Now, here's a controversial thought. Was this dance a form of true spiritual connection, or was it a way to escape the harsh realities of life? For many, the trance-like state offered a sense of freedom and relief from the everyday struggles. For hours, they were no longer bound by the mundane aspects of life. The rhythm of the drums, the intensity of the chants, the swirls of motion, all of it served to transport them beyond the physical world into a state of pure devotion. But the question remains, was it the gods taking control, or were the dancers simply seeking a powerful cathartic release from the burdens of life? And it's not just the movements themselves that were strange. It was the very nature of the ritual. These dances were often held in sacred spaces, places believed to be directly connected to the gods. The floors of these spaces were sometimes covered in ash or sand, meant to symbolize the spiritual realm. The dancers, often barefoot, would leave traces of their movement on the ground, traces that in some beliefs were seen as a physical manifestation of their divine connection. And what might surprise you is that this wasn't just limited to one specific group of people. The dance of madness was practiced by various communities throughout ancient India. In some cases, entire villages would gather for these rituals. The purpose? It wasn't just about individual enlightenment. The idea was that through the collective energy of the group, the entire community would receive the blessings of the gods. This belief in collective power and unity through dance was central to the festival's purpose. Here's a little-known fact. The dance was not always joyous. In some cases, it was performed in times of great turmoil or crisis. When the community faced threats, whether natural disasters, invasions, or famines, these dances were believed to appease the gods, ensuring their protection and favor. The intensity of the dance, its connection to the divine, was seen as a way of calling on the gods to intervene on behalf of the people. In this context, the dance wasn't just about spiritual transcendence. It was about survival. The dancers weren't just seeking enlightenment. They were seeking divine intervention in their very lives. Now, here's a fact that might challenge what you think you know. Some of these dances were considered so powerful that they were sometimes feared. The idea of humans becoming vessels for divine spirits wasn't something everyone welcomed. The intense trance-like state could cause a person to lose control entirely, sometimes acting in ways that seemed violent or unpredictable. In these moments, the dancers were not seen as themselves, but as the very embodiment of the gods. It was believed that the gods could be both destructive and protective, and their influence during these dances was equally potent. And the dangers weren't just physical. The emotional and psychological toll on the dancers was immense. Some participants reported feeling like they were dying during the dance, as if their bodies were being pulled into another dimension. They were so consumed by the experience that they lost all sense of time, reality, and even their own identity. Yet despite this, the belief that the gods were controlling them and guiding them to higher truths kept them going. It was an overwhelming, terrifying, but also deeply transformative experience. But it wasn't just about the dancers. The entire community was involved in the ritual. While some danced, others chanted, played music, or performed other sacred acts. The rhythmic chants, the pounding drums, the fiery torches, it all created an atmosphere charged with spiritual energy. For the community, witnessing the dance was just as important as participating in it. It was a shared experience that connected everyone, weaving them together in a tapestry of devotion and divine energy. The mystery, though, lies in how these ancient rituals affected the dancers afterward. Many reported lasting changes after the dance, increased spiritual insight, physical healing, or even profound psychological shifts. Some spoke of being reborn after the ritual, having shed their former selves and emerged with new clarity and wisdom. Others, however, experienced deep trauma or emotional scars from the extreme nature of the ritual. The question remains, was the reward worth the cost? So, what does this all mean for us today? The dance of madness, though centuries old, reflects a deep human desire for transcendence, for something beyond the ordinary. It's a reminder of how powerful rituals and beliefs can be in shaping a culture, and how far people will go to connect with the divine. While we may no longer dance to the point of madness, the impulse to seek something greater than ourselves remains. The legacy of these ancient dances isn't just in the physical movements. It's in the timeless human quest for meaning, connection, and the divine. Imagine the biggest water fight you've ever seen, but in ancient India, this festival wasn't just for fun. It was about cleansing the soul. People gathered by rivers, ponds, and lakes, and for hours they splashed water at each other in an almost frenzied, joyous act. But this wasn't just a random, chaotic celebration. No, it had deep spiritual significance, one that you might not expect. You see, the water wasn't simply for cooling off or having fun. It was a symbolic act of purification. The belief was that water had the power to wash away sins and misdeeds. Just as a bath might clean the body, this festival was believed to cleanse the soul, washing away impurities and offering a fresh start. But it didn't stop there. People didn't just throw water for the sake of it. There was an intricate spiritual framework behind this act. Rivers and lakes were seen as sacred entities, homes to gods and crucial elements in the purification process. People believed that the waters weren't just made of water, they were infused with the blessings of the river gods. So, when you stepped into the water during this festival, it wasn't just a casual dip, it was a sacred immersion into a realm of divine power. The water was seen as a direct conduit to the gods, carrying blessings and protection for those who partook in it. Now here's something you might not expect. This wasn't just about individual purification. The festival was seen as a collective cleansing ritual. Entire communities would gather, each person splashing water on their neighbors, creating a shared experience of renewal. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, would participate, reinforcing the bond between them and the divine. But here's where it gets interesting. While water might seem like a harmless, simple element, its use in this festival went far beyond anything we could imagine today. The very act of participating in this ritual made people feel connected to something much larger than themselves, something eternal. But not everyone was in favor of this massive celebration. There were critics who believed that the festival's chaotic nature distracted from the true purpose of worship. They argued that the rowdy behavior, loud chanting, and carefree splashing of water wasn't truly honoring the gods. Some even saw it as a form of reckless abandon that undermined the more serious aspects of their spiritual practices. But for many, it was a necessary release, a way to cleanse not just their souls, but also their society. In a world that often felt too rigid, this water fight was a form of joyous rebellion against the constraints of daily life. The festival of water fights also had a much deeper significance, tied to the ancient Indian belief in cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Just as the monsoons brought water to the earth, symbolizing a new beginning, this festival symbolized the spiritual rebirth of the individual and the community. The water that cleansed the body was also believed to rejuvenate the spirits. This wasn't just a tradition, it was a way to reset the soul, a ritual that happened once a year but carried the weight of eternity. Now you might be thinking, sure, water fights can be fun, but what makes this festival so special? And why is it seen as a form of spiritual cleansing? The answer lies in the unique connection between the people and the natural world. The belief that the gods could be reached through the elements, especially water, was a deeply ingrained part of ancient Indian culture. The water fights weren't just a chance to splash and play, they were a time to reconnect with nature and the divine. And the strange thing is, the very idea of purification through water wasn't just limited to the festivals themselves. It carried over into daily life. You see, bathing rituals, especially in rivers, were seen as an essential part of maintaining spiritual cleanliness. The belief in the divine power of water went so deep that it extended far beyond these festivals. In fact, the river itself was worshipped as a goddess, and people would travel great distances just to bathe in its holy waters. But even in the midst of the most mundane of activities, the ritual of purification through water remained a central theme. There's a controversial aspect to these celebrations that many people might not agree with. Some critics argue that by turning something sacred into a large-scale festival full of chaos and noise, people were trivializing the very thing they were trying to honor. They believed that these water fights, in their wild, boisterous nature, could potentially anger the gods. The argument is that in focusing on the revelry, the deeper spiritual connection was being lost. This is something to think about, especially when we consider how modern celebrations can sometimes overshadow the spiritual meanings behind them. But then again, there's something to be said for the communal joy and connection these festivals created. It wasn't all about discipline and reverence. It was about shared experience, about joy as a form of devotion. What's even stranger is the idea that this festival has echoes in modern practices. In fact, you might recognize the spirit of this festival in the modern-day Holi festival, where people throw colored powders at each other in a frenzy of celebration. How Holi has evolved, its roots in purification through the elements are undeniable. The colors, much like water, are symbols of life, vitality, and divine blessing. The idea of using elements, whether water or powder, to cleanse and renew remains a central theme even today. Parmaki wasn't just about fun. It was a deeply spiritual act, grounded in the belief that through community and ritual, the soul could be reborn. The impact of this festival wasn't just about the individual. It was about the community coming together to renew and re-strengthen their bond with the divine. In an era where people often lived in fear of natural disasters, famine, or war, this was a chance to reset spiritually. By engaging in this collective act of purification, they believed they could shield themselves from misfortune, cleanse their collective sins, and ensure the favor of the gods. It's a strange concept, but one that shows just how deeply people of ancient India connected their daily lives with their spirituality. So, the next time you think of a water fight, remember that in ancient India, it wasn't just about soaking your friends. It was about diving into a tradition of spiritual renewal, a celebration of nature's power, and an invitation for the gods to cleanse and bless the community. The next time you take part in a festival of water or color, remember its roots and understand that, just like the ancient people of India, you too may be seeking something deeper than mere fun, something spiritual, something transformative. How far would you go to please a god of war? In ancient India, the answer might shock you. Imagine a festival where the most sacred offering was not flowers, incense, or prayers, but something far darker: blood. blood. Yes, blood was seen as the ultimate form of tribute to the war gods, a way to secure victory in battle and strength for the warriors. It wasn't just symbolic. This was a ritual that involved real sacrifices, animal and sometimes even human, to appease the gods and ensure their favor. Now, you might find yourself wondering how this could be justified, especially considering the violence involved. But in ancient India, where the forces of nature and divine powers were deeply intertwined, blood sacrifices were not seen as barbaric or unnecessary. They were seen as an essential part of the cosmic order. These festivals were not just celebrations. They were spiritual events where the balance of life and death was at stake. The belief was that the gods thrived on the life force of the sacrifices, and in return they would grant protection, strength, and power to the people. The rituals surrounding these sacrifices were highly structured and carried out with great reverence. Animal sacrifices were common, with goats, buffaloes, and other livestock offered to the gods. The slaughter was performed by priests who believed they were channeling divine power through the act. It wasn't just a random killing. It was a sacred act that would involve elaborate prayers and chants, with the blood seen as the essence of life, flowing directly to the gods. In these festivals, the participants believed that the gods themselves would consume the life force of the offerings, ensuring their favor in the upcoming battles or endeavors. But here's the kicker. Human sacrifices were not entirely unheard of. While they were rare, there are recorded instances where the most loyal warriors, leaders, or even captives were sacrificed to the gods, believed to give the gods the ultimate offering of life force. These human sacrifices were seen as an extreme, but necessary, form of devotion, sometimes performed to atone for a great sin or to mark a momentous event. This practice was eventually abolished, but remnants of these rites can still be found in certain rituals today. This may seem shocking or even wrong by modern standards, but in ancient India, the link between spirituality and the physical world was not as compartmentalized as it is today. Sacrificing a life to secure divine protection or favor was seen as a necessary part of maintaining the cosmic balance. After all, the belief was that the gods themselves were engaged in a constant struggle with evil, and if the gods didn't receive their due offerings, the natural order could be disrupted. The fact that these sacrifices were performed during a festival adds another layer of intrigue. These weren't somber, isolated rituals. They were festivals, filled with music, dancing, and celebration. While the purpose of the festival was deeply serious, ensuring the favor of the gods, the atmosphere was not one of gloom, but of vibrant energy. People would gather from far and wide, offering food, drinks, and other sacrifices, creating a festive atmosphere that masked the darker undertones of the ceremony. A festival was both a joyous occasion and a deeply spiritual one, a time when the community came together to honor their gods and ensure their continued protection. But there's a strange twist to this whole practice. While it was believed that the gods consumed the life force of the offerings, it was also believed that the sacrifices somehow connected the people to the divines. The more extreme the offering, the greater the connection to the gods. This intense act of devotion was seen as a way for the participants to transcend their mortal selves and enter a more divine state. The gods would not only bless them with strength and power, but also with spiritual elevation. It was almost as if the blood of the sacrifice served as a conduit, allowing the gods to flow into the lives of the people, transforming them in ways that went beyond mere physical power. But as shocking as this might sound, it's important to understand the cultural context in which these practices occurred. In ancient India, life and death were seen as part of an eternal cycle, not as opposing forces. Death was not feared or avoided. It was honored as part of the natural progression of the soul. The sacrifices made during these festivals were not about death for its own sake. They were about ensuring that the cycle of life and death continued smoothly, that the gods were appeased, and that the community would thrive. Here's a strange fact you might not expect. Some of these ancient practices have survived, albeit in modified forms, in certain parts of India today. While human sacrifice is long gone, animal sacrifices still take place in some remote areas as part of local rituals. These sacrifices are often performed in honor of war gods, fertility gods, or other deities associated with prosperity and protection. It's a reminder that, even though the practices have evolved over time, the ancient belief in the power of sacrifice is still alive in some of India's more secluded traditions. You might think that such practices would be a thing of the past, completely abandoned by modern society, but the reality is more complicated. The role of sacrifice in these festivals, though now much less extreme, remains a central element in many religious rituals in India today. Offerings, whether of food, incense, or even animals, continue to play a significant role in the spiritual life of millions. The concept of offering something valuable to the gods, something that involves a personal sacrifice, is still deeply rooted in the culture. And unlike the ancient times, where blood was seen as the ultimate offering, today's sacrifices are more symbolic, focusing on offerings of love, devotion, and goodwill. This brings us to a controversial point: the question of how modern spiritual practices in India, or any other part of the world, still maintain the influence of these ancient rites. While the extreme practices of old are no longer widely accepted, the desire to offer something in exchange for divine favor remains. You might not agree with this, but it's true. Even in today's world, there's a deep connection between the spiritual and the material. People continue to perform acts of devotion, often believing believing that these acts can change their lives or bring about divine intervention in their struggles. So while we may never fully understand the ancient rituals and beliefs that led to these blood sacrifices, it's clear that they were driven by a powerful desire to connect with the divine, to ensure protection, and to guarantee strength in face of life's challenges. The festivals of blood were, in their own way, a means of survival, and as strange or controversial as it may seem, they remind us of the lengths to which people will go to ensure their place in the cosmic order, and to seek favor from the gods that govern the universe. You may know the modern version of this as Holi, a festival of color, but did you know its origins are far darker and more complex than most realize? What we celebrate today as a vibrant and joyous day of throwing colors had much more sinister beginnings. In ancient India, this festival symbolized the destruction of evil, but with a twist. It wasn't just about celebrating the triumph of good over evil, it also marked the destructive forces that were believed to purify the world. Let's take a deeper look at the Festival of Colors, which at first glance might seem like just a chaotic, joyful event. In truth, it was a much more powerful ritual designed to break down the old, burning away the destructive forces that had taken root in society. Huge bonfires were lit, representing the burning away of impurities, while the colorful powders, each one symbolizing something different, were thrown in wild, uncontrollable splashes. These weren't just fun colors. Each shade had a deeper meaning, rooted in both creation and destruction. It's often said that colors represent the forces of life. In the context of this festival, they were believed to bring life, vitality, and renewal, but the colors were also a metaphor for destruction. A burning of the old, and the chaotic nature of the powder throwing symbolized the breaking of old boundaries and the destruction of evil forces. The wildness of the celebration reflected the wild forces of nature, which could only be tamed by destruction and renewal. Now, here's the twist. While most people associate Holi with a victory of good over evil, the festival originally had ties to a much darker concept of destruction, one that was believed to be necessary in order for new life to flourish. The victory of good over evil wasn't just about defeating external enemies. It was about confronting and cleansing the evil that lurked within. It was a ritual of spiritual renewal, and the destruction of the old was seen as a necessary evil to allow for the creation of something better. But what makes this festival even more interesting is that it was once a much more intense event. The wild revelry of today, where people throw colored powders in good-natured fun, is a far cry from the original purpose of the festival. Originally, Holi was a celebration of cosmic forces, the good forces of creation, but also the dangerous forces of destruction. People believed that in order to celebrate renewal, they had to first destroy the old. What started as a serious spiritual observance morphed into a festival of joyous chaos, where everyone, regardless of social class, participated in the uproarious celebration of destruction. And here's the most surprising part. This ancient festival wasn't just about indulging in colorful chaos. The meaning behind it was a spiritual one, tied to the very fabric of life and death. In some parts of India, Holi was not only a celebration, but also a ritual designed to purify the soul. While today we think of it as fun and festive, its true origins were deeply rooted in the idea of purification through destruction. The celebration was seen as a way to cleanse oneself from the negative influences of the past year, an act of spiritual renewal that required sacrifice, symbolic or otherwise. You might be surprised to learn that the origins of the festival date back to a time when people believed the forces of nature and gods were in constant conflict, and this annual festival was a way to ensure that the good forces would triumph over the evil ones. In ancient India, evil was not just an abstract concept, but something that could manifest physically, sometimes through illness, misfortune, or even personal struggles. The bonfires, the throwing of colors, and the wild dances that accompanied the celebrations were seen as acts of spiritual warfare, meant to push back the forces of destruction and ensure the continued prosperity of the community. At the heart of this festival lies a controversial element: the chaos. For some, the wild and unruly nature of Holi may seem like a break from tradition or an unnecessary loss of control, especially in comparison to the more solemn and structured rituals of ancient Indian spirituality. However, the chaos was a key part of the renewal process. It was the symbolic destruction of the old, and this destruction was necessary for the creation of something new. It's a little controversial to think about destruction as a positive force, but in the context of Holi, it was exactly that. The breakdown of old structures allowed for the new to emerge, and without that chaos, the renewal process wouldn't have been complete. The colors themselves also carry deep meanings. For example, red was often associated with both life and death, vibrant and full of energy, but also capable of being destructive. Similarly, the blue powders symbolized the force of the divine, while yellow represented renewal and the triumph of light over darkness. Each color represented a specific element of the cosmic struggle, making Holi not just a festival of fun, but a manifestation of the eternal battle between creation and destruction. But here's a strange fact you might not have known. While many associate Holi with the legendary story of Prahlad and Holika, the true meaning of the festival was far more ancient. The legend of Prahlad, the young devotee who survived Holika's attempt to burn him alive, was just one of many myths associated with the festival. The real origins lie in the ancient rituals of fire and water worship, where the elements themselves were believed to cleanse the soul. The bonfire, for example, was seen as a way of burning away evil, while the water used to cleanse the soul was often symbolized by the colors thrown during the festival. This leads to the ultimate question. Is it possible that this seemingly lighthearted festival, which many of us see today as nothing more than a fun tradition, actually holds the key to something deeper? Could it be that the true power of Holi lies in its ability to remind us that destruction and creation are inextricably linked, that for something new to emerge, something must first be torn down or burned away? While the modern-day Holi is celebrated with laughter and joy, it still holds the ancient spiritual significance of balance, of the ever-present forces of destruction and renewal. So, next time you throw that handful of color into the air, remember that you're not just taking part in a fun party. You're connecting with a centuries-old tradition that symbolizes more than just victory over evil. You're embracing the chaos, destruction, and rebirth that have been at the heart of Holi for millennia. And in doing so, you're honoring the eternal cycle of life, death, and renewal. Could a harvest festival actually involve human sacrifices? It may sound unbelievable, but in ancient India it was not only possible, but it was also seen as necessary for ensuring the survival of the community. During times of famine or drought, when crops were failing and food was scarce, people believed they had to offer the gods something extreme to bring bountiful crops. This ancient tradition, known as the harvest sacrifice, was an act of desperation that reflected the deep spiritual and cultural bond between life, death, and survival. The harvest sacrifice festival was more than just a ritual. It was a symbolic act of appeasing the gods, pleading for their mercy and favor. As strange as it might sound, people thought that by offering something or someone of great value, they could convince the gods to bless the land with abundance. In some cases, these offerings involved food and animals, but in the most extreme situations, the ultimate offering was a human sacrifice, typically of a servant, leader, or volunteer who was believed to carry the collective sins of the people. You might be shocked by the idea that people willingly gave their lives for the harvest. It seems cruel, but the spiritual belief was that their sacrifice would guarantee that the community would survive. The rituals surrounding these offerings were deeply ceremonial, filled with prayers, chants, and acts of devotion, all aimed at ensuring that the gods would be pleased. And although it's hard to imagine in modern times, these acts weren't seen as murders. They were viewed as necessary sacrifices for the greater good. This brings us to a controversial point. Was this human sacrifice truly necessary, or was it a form of control and power over the people by the rulers or priests? Many would argue that these sacrifices were deeply tied to the beliefs of the time, but others might say they were a manipulative tool used by those in power. In any case, it's clear that these offerings were seen as vital for the survival of the people. The desperate conditions of famine or drought led them to believe that only by giving something as precious as a human life could they ensure the gods' favor. During the festival, a person chosen for sacrifice was often seen as a symbolic representation of the people's suffering. The individual was not only giving their life, but also their soul, as it was believed their death would bring a spiritual transformation. The entire process was wrapped in reverence and fear, as the community would pray that the gods would accept the sacrifice and send the rain or allow the crops to grow. Interestingly, the ultimate offering wasn't always a sacrifice made out of fear. In some cases, the person chosen was a volunteer who offered themselves in hopes of becoming a divine intermediary. They believed that by sacrificing themselves, they could transcend mortal life and become a hero in the eyes of the gods. This self-sacrifice, while dangerous, also carried the potential for eternal spiritual reward, a powerful motivation for many. But there's more to this than just the dark side of the ritual. In fact, the concept of offering a life for the greater good has been a part of human history in many cultures. The idea that survival and prosperity depend on a ritual sacrifice is not unique to India. It can be found in different forms around the world, from ancient Aztec ceremonies to the symbolic offerings in various religious practices. While these practices may seem brutal from a modern perspective, they were deeply embedded in the spiritual worldview of ancient peoples. The harvest sacrifice shows how intertwined survival and spirituality were in ancient India. The festival wasn't just about appeasing the gods, it was about ensuring the continued existence of the community. Belief in divine intervention was so powerful that people were willing to risk everything, including their own lives, for the promise of a better future. For them, the harvest wasn't just a crop, it was a matter of life and death, and they believed it was something that had to be earned through divine favor. There were certainly those who questioned the need for such extreme measures, but the overwhelming belief in the power of the gods led the majority of the population to accept these sacrifices as a necessary evil. The fear of starvation and death was enough to drive communities to extreme actions, and the thought of a failed harvest often pushed people to take desperate steps to ensure that the crops would grow. In some regions, the harvest sacrifice evolved into a more symbolic ritual, where the human element was replaced by elaborate offerings or symbolic acts of sacrifice. However, the core idea remained the same: to secure the blessings of the gods for a prosperous year. Over time, these practices became less frequent, and the emphasis shifted from literal sacrifice to symbolic rituals. However, the legacy of these ancient beliefs can still be seen in some of the agricultural festivals of today. What's even more fascinating is that, although the human sacrifice was eventually banned, its echoes can still be found in some aspects of modern rituals. The idea idea of giving to the gods to ensure prosperity is still a common thread in many religious festivals, not just in India but around the world. It's a reminder that the ancient roots of these practices are not as far removed from modern life as we might think. Even today, there are festivals where offerings are made in the hopes of bringing good fortune, health, or a bountiful harvest. The harvest sacrifice is a reminder of just how far ancient cultures were willing to go in their belief systems. What might seem like an archaic and brutal practice today was once seen as a sacred and essential act of faith. Understanding these practices helps us appreciate how much people believed in the unseen forces of the world and how they connected with their environment and gods through rituals of immense sacrifice. In the end, these ancient festivals remind us of the depth of human belief, the power of spirituality, and the lengths people would go to in their quest for survival. It's difficult to imagine such rituals in the modern world, but in ancient India, they were not just accepted, they were an essential part of life. And when we look at these ancient practices, we can see that even today, the human desire for connection with the divine and the natural world is still very much alive. Imagine walking across a path of burning coals without a single burn. Sounds impossible, right? Yet in ancient India, this was seen as a test of pure devotion. Devotees believed that if they walked on fire without injury, it was proof of their unwavering faith and loyalty to the gods. But why would anyone risk their life for such a ritual? What made this fire walk so powerful that it could transform someone spiritually? Let's take a closer look. The Firewalkers' Feast was a festival that celebrated intense devotion and divine protection. The festival was dedicated to fertility gods, believed to bless the land with abundance. The firewalk itself was not just a simple daredevil stunt. It was a spiritual act with deep meaning. It was believed that walking barefoot across hot coals would prove the devotees' purity, their strength, and their connection to the divine. And if they succeeded without injury, it was seen as a sign that they were in divine favor. But if they failed, it was considered a warning or a sign that they needed to improve their devotion. Now, imagine the atmosphere around such a ritual. The participants, sometimes as many as hundreds, would gather in anticipation. The hot coals would be spread out, glowing red and emitting heat so intense that just standing near them could cause discomfort. The air would be filled with chanting, prayers, and the sounds of drums. The rhythm of the drumming was believed to help center the mind and connect the soul to the gods. As the devotees lined up, some might feel fear, while others would prepare themselves mentally through meditation or intense concentration. But here's the strange part. The real test didn't lie in the physical ability to walk across the coals. It was in the mental preparation. Many believed that only through the purest faith and devotion could a person walk through fire without harm. It wasn't just about stepping on hot coals. It was about stepping into the unknown with the confidence that divine protection would guide them. And that's what made this festival so unique and spiritual. As the first few devotees began their walk, the crowd would hold its breath, waiting for signs of success or failure. Some would make it across without so much as a singe, while others might falter. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Those who successfully walked the coals often reported feeling a spiritual awakening afterward. They claimed to experience visions or a profound connection with the divine, and many believed they were blessed with divine protection, health, or good fortune. For the most devoted, the firewalk was seen as a way to prove their faith beyond doubt. It wasn't just about walking on fire. It was about transforming oneself into a vessel for the gods. It was about transcending mortal fears and doubts and connecting with something greater than oneself. In ancient India, this ritual was seen as a rite of passage, an opportunity to prove one's devotion and to receive the blessings of the gods in return. You might be thinking, this sounds crazy. And yes, the firewalk is certainly a dangerous act, but it's also an incredible example of how belief can influence human behavior. The lengths people would go to for spiritual salvation were astonishing. The festival of firewalking showed just how powerful the mind can be in overcoming physical limits, and how deeply intertwined spirituality and ritual were in ancient India. The act itself, although physically extreme, was rooted in a deep desire to connect with the divine and to affirm one's place in the world. The Firewalkers' Feast also has some interesting cultural implications. While it might seem like an extreme form of worship to modern eyes, similar rituals can be found in other cultures around the world. For example, firewalking is still practiced in parts of Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and even in modern-day Western cultures, where people walk on hot coals for charity events or personal challenge. But in ancient India, the firewalk was an integral part of a religious festival. It wasn't about seeking fame or fortune. It was about connecting with a higher power and achieving spiritual growth. One of the more surprising aspects of this ritual was the psychological effects it had on the participants. Those who walked successfully didn't just boast of their physical achievement. They often spoke of a transformative experience. It was said that the firewalk allowed devotees to tap into a higher state of consciousness, where they could feel the presence of the gods more acutely. Many described feelings of euphoria, of being bathed in divine light, or receiving visions of spiritual significance. For some, the experience was a life-changing event that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their spiritual journey. While firewalking might seem like an extreme or even dangerous ritual, it was deeply woven into the fabric of spiritual practices in ancient India. The fact that people were willing to endure such risks for spiritual enlightenment speaks volumes about the lengths to which ancient cultures would go in their pursuit of divine favor. And the firewalkers' ritual wasn't just a personal test, it was a communal event, symbolizing the collective devotion of the community. It's also worth noting that firewalking was sometimes performed as a group activity, further strengthening the sense of communal spirit. The collective energy of the participants would fill the air, amplifying the power of the ritual. The belief that the success of one person's firewalk could influence the success of the entire community was an essential part of the festival's meaning. It wasn't just about individual devotion, it was about reinforcing the shared connection to the divine and the group's collective responsibility for each other's well-being. You might still be wondering, how could anyone walk on fire without being burned? The answer lies in the psychological and spiritual belief that surrounded the practice. It wasn't just physical endurance that mattered, it was the belief in divine protection. The heat from the coals was intense, but devotees believed that their devotion created a shield, a kind of spiritual armor that would protect them. And perhaps, in the most surprising twist, it wasn't only the physical preparation that mattered. The mental and spiritual mindset of the participants was key. The belief that they were invincible to harm allowed them to complete the ritual unscathed. For some, the firewalk was just the beginning. It was a symbol of their readiness to face even greater challenges in life with faith and courage. But for others, it was a demonstration of their commitment to the gods, a proof of their trust in the divine to guide them through life's most dangerous obstacles. What's even more interesting is that while firewalking might seem like an isolated event, it was deeply symbolic of the spiritual and physical tests that many ancient festivals involved. The act of overcoming fear, enduring pain, and submitting to divine will was a common theme in ancient rituals. The Firewalkers' Feast serves as a reminder of how far people were willing to go in their search for spiritual salvation. While today it might seem like an act of insanity, in ancient times it was a profound act of faith that connected people to the gods in a way that few modern rituals can match. It's a stunning example of the power of belief and the extraordinary lengths people will go to in order to achieve spiritual enlightenment. And though we might not walk on fire today, the idea of sacrificing personal comfort for the sake of spiritual growth is still very much alive in many cultures and faiths. What if there was a festival so dark, so steeped in ancient customs, that it revolved entirely around a celestial event? Imagine a celebration where people gather under the cover of total darkness and wait for the first stars to appear. Sounds like something out of a forgotten myth, right? But in ancient India, such a festival existed. A festival designed not only to honor deities of the night, but also to reflect on the cycle of light and darkness in a way that would challenge everything you thought you knew about spiritual enlightenment. This celebration, known as the Night of No Stars, wasn't just about observing the night sky. You might think that a festival without any stars would be gloomy, but it was actually a time of deep spiritual reflection. Ancient rituals held that during this time, when the sky was at its darkest, the soul had the potential to become enlightened. The absence of stars was seen as an opportunity to look inward, to meditate, and to connect with the divine in ways that would be impossible under the brightness of daylight or the glimmer of the stars. Why? But how did the people of ancient India manage to find light in such profound darkness? The answer lies in the very belief system that shaped these ancient celebrations. This was not just a time to mark the passage of time. It was a moment to reflect on the eternal cycle of light and dark that defined existence. The participants would come together in complete darkness, their surroundings swallowed by the night, and wait in quiet anticipation for the first rays of starlight to appear. It wasn't about the celestial bodies themselves. It was about the symbolism they carried. In the absence of light, they meditated on the duality of existence, life and death, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction. And one of the most striking aspects of this festival was the profound sense of hope that emerged from such darkness. As the first stars began to appear, the crowd would begin to chant. These chants, filled with centuries-old mantras, were believed to strengthen the connection between the earthly and divine realms. The act of waiting for the stars, in its deepest sense, represented the triumph of hope over despair. In modern terms, it's like celebrating New Year's Eve in complete darkness, anticipating the dawn of a new year full of promise, but with much more spiritual depth and historical weight. Here's where it gets even more interesting. This festival wasn't just about observing the sky. It was about aligning one's inner world with the greater cosmic forces. People believed that through this ritual, they could gain clarity, insight, and a deeper understanding of the universe. You might think, why wait for the stars in the first place? After all, the sky is full of stars most of the time. But in this specific moment, this night of no stars, it symbolized a reset, a chance to let go of the past year, the mistakes, the burdens, and to look forward to a new spiritual journey. The night also represented the trials and tribulations that people faced on their path to enlightenment. Just as darkness conceals the world around you, the challenges in life often feel overwhelming and mysterious. But just like those first stars breaking through the dark sky, the trials would eventually pass, bringing clarity, insight, and a brighter path ahead. The followers of this festival believed that by enduring the darkness together, they would collectively enter the light, renewed and spiritually empowered. But there's a fascinating twist to this story. This festival wasn't just a night of solemn meditation. It had a communal aspect that tied people together. People from all walks of life would join in this shared experience. The unity of the group was thought to amplify the collective energy, making the spiritual experience even more powerful. It's as if everyone everyone's individual efforts were woven together to create a stronger connection to the divine. It's not just about you facing the darkness alone, it's about the community facing it together, supporting each other and finding strength in shared belief. You might be wondering how such a festival could be kept alive through generations. How could such an ancient tradition continue to captivate people's hearts, even in modern times? The answer lies in the deep cultural and spiritual fabric of India. Ancient traditions like this one have an enduring power because they tap into universal human experiences. The struggle between light and dark, the quest for spiritual clarity, and the hope for renewal. A Night of No Stars wasn't just about the heavens. It was about the human condition and the journey each person undertakes to find their own inner light. What's even more surprising is how these ancient rituals still influence modern practices in India today. While the exact rituals of the Night of No Stars may no longer be as prevalent, the underlying principles of finding clarity through darkness, of using darkness as a tool for spiritual reflection, are still very much alive in various forms. You might not hear about it on the surface, but elements of these ancient traditions influence meditation practices, the ways people celebrate the start of the new year, and even in personal growth seminars that focus on overcoming personal growth struggles. What may seem like a forgotten festival to some is, in fact, a cornerstone of ancient Indian thought, that in the darkest moments we find our greatest opportunities for enlightenment. The Night of No Stars was not just about waiting for the stars to appear. It was about the promise that no matter how dark life becomes, light will always return. So what can we take away from this ancient celebration? The lesson here is timeless. Even in our darkest hours, there is hope. Just as the first stars mark the end of a long night, every struggle, every trial, every dark moment in life is a chance to rise again. It teaches us that the light of hope, renewal, and spiritual clarity is always within reach, even when we can't see it. This ancient festival may seem strange to us today, but its message resonates deeply in every culture and every individual's quest for meaning and understanding. Animals had a much more powerful role in ancient festivals than you might realize. Some were even seen as divine beings during special celebrations. Imagine this: elephants, snakes, and even tigers parading through the streets, adorned with elaborate costumes, their movements echoing with the weight of centuries-old traditions. What might seem like a simple procession was actually an intense display of devotion, belief, and cultural power. These sacred animals were seen as earthly vessels for the gods themselves, carrying divine blessings to the people. One of the most striking elements of the sacred animal procession was the way animals were not just revered, but actively participated in these religious rituals. Elephants, with their massive presence and wisdom, were often considered the vehicle of Lord Ganesha, the god of beginnings, wisdom, and remover of obstacles. These grand creatures were draped in vibrant colors, decorated with gold, and paraded with reverence through the streets, with crowds bowing to their divine presence. It was believed that by seeing these animals in such an elevated state, the onlookers would be blessed by the gods themselves. But it wasn't just elephants. Snakes, with their sleek, mysterious beauty, were also deeply sacred to many communities. They were believed to be the protectors of the earth, especially during the monsoon season, and were honored during festivals. The snake is a symbol of the divine forces of nature, representing fertility, transformation, and power. Some of these processions would see serpents being paraded in temples or through villages, wrapped around sacred trees or led by priests, with the community following, believing that this display would bring them closer to the spiritual world. The most astonishing part of these processions was the role of tigers. You might be surprised to learn that in some ancient festivals, tigers were revered as protectors and symbols of the fierce, untamable power of the divine. These majestic creatures were often represented in sacred rituals that celebrated the forces of nature. In some traditions, humans even dressed as tigers, embodying the animal's powerful energy during ceremonial dances. While you might think that such dangerous animals would be a source of fear, in these ancient celebrations, tigers were seen as creatures to be honored, symbols of strength, vitality, and divine favor. These sacred animal processions weren't just displays of reverence. They also revealed the deep connection between the people and the natural world. The way animals were integrated into these religious practices shows how humans and the animal kingdom were seen as intrinsically linked in the spiritual landscape of ancient India. The belief was that animals, in their purity and strength, were able to bridge the earthly and divine realms. This idea transcended beyond simple worship. It became a fundamental part of how people understood their relationship to the divine and the natural world around them. However, it wasn't all about awe and admiration for the animals. There was a darker side to these processions. Some animals were believed to carry dangerous powers, and while the crowds revered them, there was also a sense of fear and respect. In some instances, the processions would see animals, particularly tigers, controlled with great caution, as their wild nature was never fully tamed. The danger they posed was always a reminder that the forces of nature could not be completely subdued, and that the divine was not something to be taken lightly. In these processions, the animals didn't just represent power, they also served as a mirror for human behavior. The way people interacted with these sacred creatures, showing them respect, awe, and fear, was a reflection of how the people viewed their own place in the universe. They weren't just humble subjects of a god, but also participants in a larger cosmic order, constantly balancing the forces of nature and the the divine. The sacred animal processions of ancient India remind us of a time when humans were deeply attuned to the natural world. These celebrations weren't just about religious rituals. They were about acknowledging the divine in all living creatures. Whether it was the elephant, the snake, or the tiger, each of these animals carried a profound connection to the gods, and in turn, humans could connect with the divine through them. Perhaps the most interesting part of this celebration is how it links the ancient past with the present. Many of these sacred animals still play an important role in Indian culture today. The reverence for elephants, for example, can be seen in modern festivals like Ganesh Chaturthi, where large statues of Lord Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, are paraded through the streets accompanied by song, dance, and prayer. Similarly, snakes are still honored in certain festivals, such as Nag Panchami, when people worship snakes to seek protection and blessings. Tigers are symbolic in modern-day India, representing strength and courage, often appearing in folklore and art. The legacy of these ancient animal processions is still very much alive. While the exact rituals may have changed over time, the core belief that animals are sacred beings, representing divine power, continues to shape how people interact with the natural world. These sacred animals, once seen as divine intermediaries, still hold the power to connect the earthly and spiritual realms in ways that are both awe-inspiring and humbling. So, what can we take away from this ancient tradition? Sacred animal processions remind us of the importance of respecting and honoring the creatures that share our world. They show us that nature is not just something to be used or controlled, but something to be revered. In ancient India, animals were not just part of the environment. They were sacred beings that connected humanity with the divine. And perhaps in our modern world, there is still much we can learn from this reverence for the natural world, where animals are not just creatures to be admired, but integral parts of a larger divine order. Imagine being swept up in the rhythm of a chaotic, frenzied dance, your body moving to the beat of ancient drums as you lose all sense of time. But here's the twist. This isn't just any dance. In some of ancient India's most sacred festivals, these dances were believed to be the embodiment of divine forces, and the deeper you danced, the closer you got to connecting with the gods. But how could such a wild, energetic event transform someone spiritually? What if I told you this was not just entertainment, but a way to embody divine power itself? In the Dance of Madness, also known as the Possession Dance, participants would enter trance-like states, believed to be possessed by the gods they were invoking. These were no ordinary dances. They were intense, physical rituals that could go on for hours, with wild, feverish movements. The frantic rhythms of drums and chants stirred the participants into a state of ecstatic fervor, where they believed they could commune with the gods directly. The more extreme the dance, the more powerful the blessing from the gods. But what was the cost of such spiritual awakening, and was it worth the danger? You see, these rituals weren't just about movement, they were about transformation. As the dancers twirled, stomped, and spun, they believed they were shedding their mortal selves, becoming vessels for the divine. It was not unheard of for dancers to suffer injuries as they became overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Some would collapse, while others would continue to dance uncontrollably until they experienced what they call divine possession. They weren't just dancing, they were channeling the god's very essence into their bodies. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on this. The dance was believed to give participants a direct line to the gods, a way of transcending their mortal existence to experience the divine. Can you imagine how this would feel? It wasn't just a ritual, it was the opportunity to connect with the very forces that shaped the universe. In ancient India, spirituality wasn't something distant or abstract. It was something you could experience in your own body. It wasn't just about beliefs, it was about living those beliefs. The wild movements, the overwhelming rhythms, the sweat and the exhaustion, it all pointed to one thing: a spiritual awakening. Afterward, dancers often claimed to have profound revelations, visions, or even life-changing experiences. Some felt healed from physical or mental suffering. Others believed they had received divine messages. It's a shocking thought, isn't it? The idea that something as intense as a dance could lead to such spiritual transformation. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. This wasn't just some isolated ritual. It was embedded deeply in the religious fabric of ancient India, where people believed that to touch the divine, one had to go beyond the ordinary, beyond the rational. They needed to surrender completely to the process, to lose themselves in the ecstasy of movement. It was believed that the more extreme the dance, the closer one came to breaking down the barriers between the human and the divine. There's a lesser-known fact that will make you rethink these rituals. Some of these dances were performed to honor deities of destruction, particularly Shiva, the god of destruction and regeneration. It seems odd at first. Why would a god of destruction be honored with such violent, frenetic behavior? But when you understand the philosophy, it makes sense. Destruction was seen not as an end, but as a necessary process for renewal and creation. Just as the old must be destroyed for the new to emerge, the dancers, too, would destroy their own limitations to be reborn spiritual. Now, this is where the mystery lies. Did the dancers truly experience divine possession, or was it the sheer intensity of the experience that led to their vision? Most historians and scholars believe that these dances acted as powerful psychological triggers. The collective energy of the group, the trance-like state induced by music and chanting, and the deep ritualistic movements could all combine to produce a psychological and emotional breakthrough. The dancers were so deeply immersed in the the experience that they lost track of reality and entered a heightened state of consciousness. But this is not to downplay the sheer power of belief in these rituals. Their belief in the spiritual power of the dance was so profound that it could, in a sense, transcend ordinary reality. For them, the experience wasn't just about physical exertion, it was about spiritual fulfillment. And the truth is, the intense rituals of ancient India often pushed people to the edge of their capabilities, whether through dancing, fasting, or other forms of extreme devotion. In doing so, they believed they could forge a deeper connection with the divine. One final shocking detail: some of the most extreme versions of this dance would end in ritualized death and rebirth ceremonies. Ah yes, some dancers were believed to enter into a near-death state, only to be reborn through the intervention of the god. This ritual death was seen as a metaphor for the old self being destroyed and the new self emerging, stronger and closer to divinity. These dances were not just performances, they were profound spiritual experiences. How people of ancient India sought to touch the divine, often with such intensity that it felt like a complete transformation of the self. But the cost of such spirituality, it wasn't easy. It demanded surrender, and it demanded the willingness to push beyond one's limits in the pursuit of a higher truth. The dance of madness wasn't just about physical movement, it was about the very essence of life, death, and rebirth. It was a reflection of the ancient Indian understanding of the cyclical nature of existence, where destruction and creation are eternally linked. By the end of these wild and exhausting rituals, the participants believed they were changed, transformed into something greater, something divine. Whether you agree or not, the intensity and devotion of these dances reveal the powerful connection between mind, body, and spirit in ancient Indian spirituality. Would you be willing to surrender yourself completely for the chance to touch the divine? The ancient world of India is filled with vibrant colors, loud drums, and bizarre ceremonies. But what if I told you that some of these ancient festivals were so bizarre that even the wisest kings couldn't make sense of them? These festivals didn't just celebrate life, they also delved into the realms of death, sacrifice, and divine possession, forcing everyone to question what they thought they knew about spiritual devotion. Some of these rituals involved gods riding chariots made of fire, while others required people to sacrifice their own bodies. And that's just the beginning. Buckle up, because we're about to take a wild ride through the craziest festivals in ancient India. And trust us, they're not what you think. One of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Indian festivals was the deep connection to spirituality and the gods. Take, for example, the sacred animal processions. Animals were far more than just creatures of the earth. They were seen as divine beings themselves. Imagine walking through a city where sacred elephants, serpents, and even tigers were paraded down the streets. These animals weren't just symbols. They were believed to carry the gods' blessings and powers, walking in front of the people to guide and protect them. The reverence for these animals was so intense that many people considered them more than animals. They were divine manifestations of the gods themselves. And some animals were even dressed in elaborate costumes to symbolize different deities, creating a mix of both fear and awe among the onlookers. What's even more striking about these animal processions is the way they showed the complex relationship between humans and nature in ancient India. On one hand, these animals were revered, treated with the utmost respect, and even honored with rituals meant to protect them. On the other hand, the same animals could be seen as potentially dangerous, embodying both the protective and destructive forces of nature. It wasn't just about admiration, it was about balance. The procession was a reminder of the delicate balance humans had with the natural world, where every creature had its place in the divine order. However, the ceremonies surrounding these sacred animals weren't always as gentle as they might seem. Some festivals involving these animals were meant to symbolize the power of the gods to control life and death. The belief was that these animals carried not just the blessings of the gods, but also their wrath. Some animals, like tigers, were associated with fearsome deities known for their destructive power. To see these creatures up close during a sacred procession wasn't just awe-inspiring, it could be downright terrifying. Imagine the tension in the air as people prayed for protection from the fierce gods represented by these creatures. This wasn't just about showing respect for animals, it was about understanding the cyclical nature of life and death, of creation and destruction. The sacred procession didn't just honor the animals, it honored the forces of life and death, both of which played an essential role in the spirituality of ancient India. In some cases, these rituals would end with the sacrifice of an animal, completing the cycle of life and death. While animal sacrifices were eventually banned in many parts of India, the power of these ceremonies still echoed through the culture. But what makes these animal processions even more fascinating is the way they connected to the larger spiritual practices of the time. For example, in many of these festivals, the participation of the animals was seen as a way for humans to connect with the divine. By seeing these sacred creatures walking the streets, participants believed they were witnessing a direct manifestation of the gods' power on earth. The power and mysticism surrounding these animals were meant to remind everyone of the divine forces that governed their lives, forces that were often unseen but always present. What's even more fascinating about this is how the belief in these divine creatures was integrated into everyday life. In ancient India, animals like elephants and tigers weren't just seen as pets or creatures of the wild, they were essential to spiritual life. For example, were believed to be the earthly manifestation of Lord Ganesha, Ganesha, the god of wisdom and remover of obstacles. They were revered not only for their strength but for their spiritual significance. And snakes, they were believed to be embodiments of the god Shiva, representing the destructive yet regenerative power of the universe. But the sacred animal procession wasn't just about paying homage to these creatures. It was a ritual that united the community in a shared understanding of the divine. Everyone, from the poorest farmer to the richest king, gathered to witness and participate in the procession, which was seen as a sacred act of devotion. It wasn't just about watching the animals. It was about participating in the divine energy they carried. The atmosphere was charged with energy, and every participant was expected to engage with the ritual in a deep spiritual way. And here's a rare fact that might surprise you. Some of these sacred animal processions also included human participants who were believed to be chosen by the gods to walk alongside these divine creatures. These individuals were seen as vessels of divine power, walking in harmony with the animals, embodying the gods themselves. Imagine walking side by side with an elephant that was believed to carry the essence of a god. The spiritual weight of such a moment was unimaginable for those who participated. Now let's take a step back and think about the mystery behind all of this. Most people today wouldn't imagine that such profound spiritual connections could be tied to something as everyday as animals. But for the people of ancient India, animals weren't just part of the natural world. They were integral to their understanding of the universe. They were conduits to the divine manifestations of the god's will. And the sacred animal processions were just one example of how the divine was woven into the fabric of everyday life. By the end of these processions, those who participated weren't just observers. They were believers, connected to the divine through the sacred animals they had witnessed. These festivals weren't just about awe. They were about experiencing the presence of the gods in a way that no temple or prayer could replicate. The sacred animals were living symbols of divine power, and through them, the people were able to touch the divine in a way that felt real, tangible, and transformative. Now, as we reflect on these ancient festivals, it's clear that they weren't just about celebrating life. They were about recognizing the deep connection between the material and spiritual worlds, and acknowledging that life and death, creation and destruction, are all part of the same divine cycle. These festivals were a way for ancient Indians to understand their place in the grand order of the universe and to connect with the divine forces that shaped their lives. The sacred animal processions of ancient India show us just how deeply spirituality was embedded in everyday life. They weren't just public events, they were divine rituals, a reminder that the divine wasn't separate from life, but part of it, flowing through every creature, every moment, and every person. By the end of these wild, mesmerizing processions, the community wasn't just entertained, they were transformed, linked together by the power of the divine in the form of the animals that led the way. Throughout ancient India, festivals weren't just about celebration, they were about connecting with the divine, about appeasing gods, and even about experiencing life and death in their rawest forms. One of the most striking rituals that comes to mind when thinking about the crazy festivals in India is the sacred animal procession. Imagine this: elephants, snakes, tigers, and other revered animals all paraded through the streets, not as mere creatures, but as divine beings. You see, ancient Indian culture believed that these animals weren't just creatures of the earth, they were the very manifestations of divine power. Elephants, revered as symbols of wisdom and strength, were seen as earthly representatives of Lord Ganesha, the god of beginnings and remover of obstacles. Snakes, often associated with Shiva, were seen as embodiments of his destructive and regenerative powers. And tigers, they were thought to be the messengers of Kali, the goddess of destruction and transformation. So, when these animals walked through the streets, it wasn't just a parade, it was a moving display of the divine, an offering of life to the gods themselves. The sacred animal procession was about more than just awe and reverence for these majestic creatures. It symbolized a deep spiritual connection between humans and nature, where the divine was not separated from the earth, but rather embodied in every living thing. The people believed that by seeing these divine animals walk the streets, they were witnessing the gods themselves in their physical forms. But it wasn't just admiration that these processions invoked. They were also filled with a palpable sense of fear. Why fear? These animals, though revered, also symbolized the destructive forces of the divine. Elephants could stampede, tigers could attack, and snakes could poison. The belief was that these creatures, in their divinity, held immense power. Their presence was not just a blessing, but also a reminder of the dangerous power of the gods. While many people watched in awe, others participated in these festivals in hopes of receiving divine protection or avoiding divine wrath. Imagine walking down the street, watching a majestic elephant adorned with gold and flowers, but also knowing that the god it represented had the power to destroy. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But what was the deeper significance of these processions? It wasn't just about showing respect for the animals or honoring the gods. It was about seeing the divine in every moment of life, in every breath, and in every creature. To the ancient Indians, these animals weren't just animals. They were conduits to the divine. The sacred animal procession served as a reminder that the gods were all around them, constantly watching, protecting, and sometimes destroying, depending on their will. It was about recognizing the thin veil between the divine and the earthly world. Now, here's something that might surprise you. While we often associate these animals with power, in many instances, they were also considered vulnerable. Elephants, for example, though majestic, were also seen as highly sensitive creatures. In some traditions, the taming of elephants was considered a sacred task, one that required great spiritual devotion. In fact, in some regions of ancient India, people believed that the gods would choose which elephant would be the most suitable for the procession, making it a highly revered and carefully chosen creature. This belief added an additional layer to the procession, making it not just about the divine, but about the special bond between humans and the creatures that embodied that divinity. Imagine then what it must have been like to be one of the devotees walking in the procession, side by side with these sacred beings. Many of them weren't just spectators, they were active participants in the ritual, embodying the gods themselves as they walked with these divine creatures. Sometimes, people believed that by walking alongside these animals, they were receiving a blessing from the gods, not just through the animals' presence, but through their own connection to them. It was as if the act of walking with these creatures turned the participants into gods themselves, embodying the divine power that these animals represented. What makes these rituals even more fascinating is that some of these sacred animals were also dressed in elaborate costumes, symbolizing different deities. Imagine a tiger adorned with jewels, its fur dyed in bright colors, representing the power and ferocity of Kali, or a serpent coiled and glistening with golden ornaments, walking in the procession as a representation of the god Shiva. These animals, in their costumes, weren't just physical creatures, they were representations of the gods themselves, bringing the divine into the physical world. As the procession moved through the streets, the air was filled with chants, prayers, and sometimes even the rhythmic beating of drums. It wasn't just a parade, it was a sacred event that united the community in a shared experience of divinity. But with all of this reverence came a deep understanding of the destructive power of the gods. These animals weren't just symbols of divine protection, they were also reminders of the power of destruction. The gods, represented by these creatures, held the balance of life and death in their hands, and their presence reminded everyone of the fragility of life. You might be wondering, what happened to these sacred animal processions? Well, as time passed and India's culture evolved, many of these rituals faded or were modified. Some animal sacrifices that once took place as part of these festivals were eventually banned, and the role of the sacred animal in the procession changed. But the symbolism remained. Even today, in many parts of India, animals like elephants still hold a special place in religious ceremonies and festivals, carrying with them the deep spiritual significance they've held for centuries. What's truly fascinating is that despite all the changes, the idea that animals could embody divine power remains a central theme in Indian culture. Even now, many people believe that animals, from cows to elephants, hold spiritual significance, a belief that traces its roots back to these ancient festivals. So while the specifics of the rituals may have changed, the belief in the divine nature of animals is still very much alive in the cultural fabric of India. As you reflect on these ancient festivals, it's clear that they were more than just celebrations. They were ways for people to connect with the divine forces that governed their lives. The sacred animal processions were a powerful reminder of the connection between the natural world and the spiritual world, and how deeply intertwined they were in the ancient Indian worldview. Either revered or feared, these animals were the very vessels through which the divine communicated with the people. They were symbols of both creation and destruction, blessings and curses, life and death, showing just how complex and multifaceted the divine could be. By the end of these processions, those who participated weren't just observers of divine power, they were active participants in it. Through the sacred animals, they touched the divine, and in doing so, they became part of something far greater than themselves. These festivals weren't just about animals, they were about the divine connection that exists in every living thing, and the recognition of that power that lies just beneath the surface of everyday lives. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient city, your senses overwhelmed by the wild energy around you. The air is thick with the sound of drums, the scent of incense, and the crackle of fire. But it's not just another festival. Yes, what if I told you that some of India's oldest celebrations weren't just about joy and dancing? They were rituals so intense that they could alter the very fabric of life and death. In this section, we're going to dive deep into one of the most astonishing festivals in ancient India, the sacred animal procession, and the powerful role these animals played in the spiritual and physical realms. Have you ever wondered why certain animals are revered in some cultures more than others? Elephants, snakes, tigers, these aren't just creatures roaming the earth in India. To the ancient Indians, they were embodiments of the gods themselves. But how did these majestic beings become sacred in the first place? In ancient India, animals were seen as the direct representatives of gods and goddesses. Take the elephant, for instance. This massive creature, with its immense strength and wisdom, was revered as the earthly incarnation of Lord Ganesha, the god of beginnings and remover of obstacles. Now, what's even more fascinating is that during the sacred animal processions, these elephants weren't just admired, they were believed to carry the divine power of Ganesha, offering blessings to anyone who came into their presence. But here's the twist. Despite their revered status, these elephants were also dangerous. Anyone in their path risked being trampled, a stark reminder of the volatile nature of divine power. Imagine witnessing such a procession. As you stand in the crowd, the elephant's majestic form strides past, its tusks adorned with gold and flowers. It's breathtaking, but there's more. Elephants were not the only animals involved. Snakes, the ultimate ultimate symbol of Shiva, were also paraded, their bodies glistening and often adorned with jewelry. In some festivals, these snakes were revered as gods in their own right, their presence considered essential for spiritual protection. But how did this work? The people believed that these animals were physical manifestations of the divine. A procession wasn't just about watching these creatures walk by, it was about connecting with the gods in a tangible way. Some participants in the procession believed that by walking alongside these sacred animals, they could receive divine protection or blessings. Now, imagine walking beside a huge snake or an elephant, knowing that it wasn't just a wild animal, but a god in disguise. For the participants, these animals were not simply animals. They were spiritual intermediaries, transporting the power of the divine into the physical realm. The sacred animal procession was about more than just reverence. It was about the fear and awe these animals inspired. The idea was that by participating in the ritual, people could gain favor with the gods. These divine creatures, revered for their power, could also destroy. The wildness and unpredictability of these animals were reminders that the gods were not only protectors, but also bearers of destruction. Elephants, though seen as symbols of wisdom and strength, were also capable of great violence. The same goes for the tigers, which represented Kali, the goddess of destruction. But the strangest part, the deeper you go into these rituals, the more you realize that the lines between animal and god weren't just blurry, they were non-existent. The animals weren't just honored, they were seen as the embodiment of divine forces. When a tiger walked through the streets, it wasn't a beast, it was Kali herself. When a snake coiled through the procession, it was Shiva. This belief was so strong that some people believed the animals could actually channel the will of the gods. They weren't just passively revered, they were active participants in the spiritual life of the community. But how did people actually interact with these animals? Many of the sacred animals, particularly the elephants, were dressed in ornate costumes, symbolizing the gods they represented. Elephants were draped in rich fabrics, their heads adorned with gold crowns and jewels. This wasn't just for show, it was a way to amplify their divine presence. By adorning them in these elaborate outfits, the participants believed they were helping to bring the divine closer to earth, making it visible to all. The processions were always surrounded by ritualistic chanting, music, and prayers, amplifying the spiritual energy that these animals were believed to channel. It wasn't just a display of grandeur, it was an immersive spiritual experience. But as the procession moved through the streets, a more somber truth lingered in the background. These sacred animals weren't entirely under human control. Elephants, despite being revered, were known to become violent during these processions. In some cases, these animals would trample those who got too close, a direct manifestation of the uncontrollable force of the divine. The power of the gods embodied in these animals was both a blessing and a danger. And let's not forget the tigers. Tigers were viewed as messengers of Kali, a goddess known for her fierce nature. During the processions, these powerful creatures would often be displayed with extreme caution. They were revered for their strength and their role in keeping the balance of life and death. The presence of the tiger wasn't just awe-inspiring, it was humbling. It reminded the people of the chaotic and destructive power that was always lurking just beneath the surface of life. But why did this practice persist for so long? What was it about these animals that made them so integral to the spiritual life of ancient India? The answer lies in the deep connection between spirituality and nature. In ancient India, nature wasn't something separate from the divine, it was a manifestation of it. The belief that the divine could be seen, touched, and felt in the natural world was central to the rituals. Through these processions, the sacred animals were not just part of the world, they were the gateway to the divine. What's perhaps most surprising is that these ancient practices weren't just rooted in superstition. They reflected a profound belief in the interconnectedness of all things, the divine, nature, and humanity. The animals were seen as the ultimate symbol of the divine power that flowed through everything. They were revered not just for their physical strength or beauty, but for their ability to connect the human world to the spiritual realm. As we reflect on these sacred animal processions, it's clear that they were more than just rituals. They were deep spiritual experiences that shaped the relationship between humans and nature in ancient India. Even today, the reverence for animals like elephants and tigers continues in India, demonstrating the lasting impact of these ancient beliefs. The sacred animal processions remind us of the complexity of the divine and the intimate relationship humans have with the natural world. These festivals weren't just celebrations, they were profound experiences that connected the living to the gods, the animals to the divine, and humanity to nature itself. The festival we are about to explore is not your typical celebration. In fact, it's one of the most intense and controversial traditions of ancient India. Imagine a sea of people gathered in the streets, animals, massive sacred creatures, paraded through the city, each one carrying the blessings of the gods. The sacred animal procession wasn't just about celebration, it was a way to connect with the divine and to seek blessings, but it came with a price. Let's take a look at the fascinating and sometimes terrifying role of animals in these ancient festivals. Elephants, for example, were considered divine creatures in India. The very sight of one was enough to make people bow in reverence, believing they were witnessing the manifestation of Lord Ganesha, the god of wisdom and remover of obstacles. But did you know that these elephants weren't just symbols? They were more than just powerful creatures admired for their size and majesty. They were considered the physical embodiment of the god himself. So what did this mean for the people who witnessed these sacred processions. The elephant wasn't the only revered animal in these festivals. Snakes, tigers, and other creatures also played a central role, representing different gods and goddesses. Snakes in particular were associated with Shiva, the god of destruction, who is often depicted with serpents coiled around his arms. Imagine the sight: a massive glittering snake, sometimes adorned with precious stones and jewelry, being paraded through the streets as a symbol of divine power. People believed that being in close proximity to these sacred animals could bestow divine blessings, protection, and even healing. But this reverence wasn't without its risks. Animals like elephants, despite their sacred status, were unpredictable. The very power that made them divine could also make them dangerous. In some festivals, elephants were known to become agitated, trampling anything or anyone that got in their way. People would willingly throw themselves under the wheels of chariots or in front of elephants, hoping to receive the god's blessings, often without regard for their own safety. Why would anyone take such a risk? It wasn't just devotion, it was an intense belief that these animals, as earthly forms of the divine, could bring them closer to the gods themselves. Tigers were another powerful symbol in these festivals, representing the fierce goddess Kali, the goddess of destruction. Kali's followers revered tigers for their strength and ferocity, and during the sacred processions, tigers would often be paraded alongside the other animals. In some rare occasions, devotees would try to approach the tigers, seeking the goddess's favor. But the tiger, like the elephant, wasn't just an emblem of power. It was a reminder that the divine could be dangerous. The power of Kali wasn't just for protection. It was a force that could both create and destroy. The sacred animal procession, though filled with reverence, was also a reminder of the raw, uncontrollable power of the divine. Elephants and tigers weren't just adored, they were feared. The more extreme the display, the greater the belief that the gods would bless you. For those lucky enough to witness these ceremonies, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the gods themselves in physical form. The belief that these animals were not just animals, but divine beings, left a profound impact on the people of ancient India. There's a shocking, lesser-known fact about these sacred animals. While they were treated with immense respect and reverence, their care was not always about the animals' well-being. It was about the spiritual significance they held. For example, elephants were sometimes kept in captivity for years, their movements and actions controlled during the festival processions. These majestic creatures, revered as gods, were often confined to the streets, being paraded through cities, forced to display their power and grace in a ritualistic fashion. But here's the twist: animals like the tiger, revered for its ferocity, also had a dangerous role in some of these rituals. There were times when these animals were sent into battle or involved in combat, believed to act as instruments of divine will. The festival wasn't just a peaceful celebration. It was a powerful, sometimes violent ritual meant to ensure divine favor in battles or important decisions. Now let's talk about the sacredness of the procession itself. People didn't just watch the animals walk by. They believed that by walking in the procession, or by being close to the animals, they could connect with the divine. It was a spiritual experience, one that transcended the physical world. By witnessing the procession, it was believed that the gods would bless those present. People believed they could experience moments of divine intervention in their lives. Here's a rare fact: the processions weren't just about the animals. The people who participated in these rituals were deeply involved in the performance. The ceremonies included chanting, offerings, and even dancing in the streets, all of which were believed to enhance the divine connection. The animals, representing gods, were seen as the spiritual leaders of these celebrations, but the people, in their participation, were also believed to channel divine power. Despite the reverence, however, these festivals were not just about the animals. They were deeply interconnected with the people's lives. Festivals like this one were about survival, protection, and the spiritual health of the community. In many ways, they were acts of desperation as much as devotion. The belief that the gods would intervene for the well-being of the community was central to these festivals. This was a time when spirituality and survival were inseparable, a time when divine protection was seen as the only way to ensure the safety and prosperity of the people. But as we come to understand the complex relationships between humans, animals, and the divine, we also start to see the contradictions. The animals were revered, but they were also feared. They were divine, but they were also dangerous. Animals were not merely part of the ritual, they were the ritual, and yet they were controlled, symbolizing the fine line between power and destruction. By the end of the procession, the people would leave with more than just physical offerings. They would leave with the belief that they had been blessed by the gods themselves, embodied in the sacred animals that walked beside them. But they also carried with them a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between reverence and fear, between life and death. This was the power of the sacred animal processions. They weren't just celebrations. They were intense spiritual experiences that linked the human world to the divine. And though the rituals may seem extreme or even strange to us now, they represented a deep-seated belief in the power of the gods, the importance of nature, and the intricate connections between all living things. These ancient processions were not just about awe, they were about survival, power, and the understanding of a world where the divine walked alongside the mortal. You might think of the world's most famous festivals as colorful, joyous events. Think of Holi or Diwali. But did you know that in ancient India there were festivals so bizarre that even the wisest kings would scratch their heads in confusion? These festivals festivals weren't just celebrations. They were deeply intertwined with spirituality, power, and survival. Let's talk about one of the most powerful and spiritually charged festivals that took place in ancient India, the sacred animal procession. It wasn't just about parading sacred creatures. It was about bridging the gap between the human world and the divine. The role of animals in these ancient festivals was profound. Imagine a giant elephant, its tusks gleaming, its massive body decked out in gold and gems, marching through the streets. But this wasn't just a show of grandeur. Elephants were considered to be divine manifestations of Lord Ganesha, the remover of obstacles. And if you've ever seen a live elephant, you know their power can be overwhelming. The ancient people believed that seeing these majestic creatures was like having a direct link to the gods. But this wasn't just about watching in awe. It was about active participation. People would gather to witness the procession, which wasn't only an occasion of awe, but also one of reverence. The elephants, snakes, tigers, and other sacred animals were paraded through the streets, each one representing a different deity. The animals weren't just symbols. They were seen as vessels carrying the gods' blessings. As these animals passed by, devotees would bow down or even lay down in front of them, hoping for a divine blessing. This ritual was a powerful reminder of the human connection to the divine, but also a reminder of how fragile that connection could be. It wasn't just elephants that played a major role. Sacred snakes associated with Lord Shiva also had an important role in these celebrations. These snakes were often dressed with beautiful jewels, sometimes as symbols of the god's divine energy. As serpents slithered through the streets, the followers believed they were witnessing the power of Shiva himself. However, there's a shocking fact here that might make you uneasy. The snakes were often kept in close confinement and forced to perform in the procession. While they were worshipped as gods, they were also seen as dangerous beings, and their power was used as a reminder that the divine could be as destructive as it was protective. And then there's the tiger. Revered for its fierceness and strength, the tiger was a symbol of Kali, the goddess of destruction. Kali's devotees believed that walking with these fierce animals would bring them closer to the goddess herself. There's a lesser-known fact. Some of these tigers were trained for battle. They would sometimes be set loose in controlled environments, where their wild nature would be used as a demonstration of divine strength. It was believed that in the presence of these powerful animals, the faithful could earn the favor of the gods. But not all the divine creatures were treated as gently as you might think. These animals were revered, but they were also controlled. They were expected to perform their divine roles for the people, and sometimes this meant that their natural behaviors had to be suppressed for the sake of the ritual. Think about this. The elephants, while revered, could also become uncontrollable, as they were forced to march through crowds or sometimes trample over obstacles, believed to purify those who were in the path. Yes, these massive creatures, which symbolize divine power, could also be incredibly dangerous. You might be wondering, why would anyone take such a risk? Why would someone throw themselves under an elephant's foot or face a tiger? The truth is, they believed in the power of the gods so strongly that they were willing to sacrifice their own safety for a chance at divine protection, blessings, or even immortality. This ritual, while awe-inspiring, carried with it an undertone of fear and respect for the unknown and the divine. The sacred procession didn't just involve watching. It required active participation. Devotees would often carry offerings to the animals, fruits, flowers, and incense, believing that by giving these gifts to the sacred creatures, they were honoring the gods directly. In fact, the offerings were believed to reach the gods through these animals. This was their link to the divine, and they believed that by providing the correct offerings, they could ask for anything from protection in battle to bountiful harvests. But there's a twist. The animals revered as gods were also part of a much larger system of control. You see, in many of these festivals, the animals weren't just part of a ceremonial procession. They were also being controlled and trained to behave in certain ways to suit the rituals. The elephant, for example, wasn't just paraded. It was often used in battle as a symbol of divine power. And some of these animals weren't trained just for the festivals. They were used to enforce the ruler's power and to intimidate the population. It wasn't just the animals that were awe-inspiring. Humans, too, participated in the rituals surrounding these sacred creatures. Followers would chant prayers, make offerings, and even wear costumes to match the deities that these animals represented. In some cases, people would even wear elaborate garbs to mimic the animals, believing that by embodying the god, they could channel its power. But here's the final revelation. While these animals were revered as divine, they were also a stark reminder of the fine line between creation and destruction. The very creatures that were believed to carry the blessings of the gods could also bring about destruction if not treated with the utmost respect. This wasn't just a show of power. It was a stark reminder of the forces that govern the universe, chaos, balance, and the natural world. By the end of these sacred animal processions, those who participated didn't just return home with a story. They returned with the belief that they had touched the divine itself. The festival wasn't just a display of grandeur. It was a powerful spiritual experience that shaped their understanding of the universe, their gods, and their place in it. It wasn't just about worship. It was about survival, fear, and respect for the forces of nature, which could either bless or destroy. This complex relationship between humans, animals, and the divine was at the heart of these ancient festivals. The sacred animals weren't just there to be admired. They were there to remind people of their connection to the gods, the world around them, and the forces that could shape their lives. And as strange as these festivals may seem to us now, they represent a deep and profound understanding of spirituality that transcended the boundaries of what we know today. In ancient India, the divine and the earthly were intricately woven together, creating festivals that were more than just celebrations. They were powerful expressions of faith. Nowhere was this more apparent than in one of the most mysterious and profound festivals, the Night of No Stars. Imagine a festival that takes place in complete darkness, where people gather not to see, but to feel. It might sound strange, but in ancient India, this was a deeply spiritual celebration with profound philosophical significance. The festival was centered around the celestial cycles, particularly the darkest night of the year, when no stars were visible. In that deep, enveloping darkness, people would gather in silence. It was a moment of total stillness, where the absence of light symbolized more than just an empty sky. It was seen as a time of pure potential. The idea was that in the darkest moments, one could find enlightenment. As participants meditated, waiting for the first star to appear, they believed that it represented the triumph of light over darkness, a spiritual rebirth. This wasn't just a peaceful gathering. It was an intensely emotional and metaphysical event. People believed that the stars represented divine guidance, and to see the first star rising was to witness the divine light emerging from the darkness. It was as though, in that moment of total nothingness, the world itself was being recreated. The first star was seen not just as a celestial body, but as the incarnation of hope, a spark of divinity breaking through despair. The symbolism of light emerging from darkness also reflected a universal belief in renewal. The darkness, which could be seen as a metaphor for ignorance, suffering, or even death, was necessary before enlightenment could occur. The celebration was a reminder that hardship too has its place in the cosmic order. Without darkness, light could not be appreciated. This idea, that suffering and joy are inseparable, was core to many spiritual teachings in ancient India. What you may find surprising is that this festival wasn't just about waiting for the stars. The people involved in the ritual practiced specific rituals during this period of waiting. As they sat in complete darkness, they would chant sacred mantras, focusing on achieving a meditative state where they could connect with the divine. It was believed that this connection could transcend the limits of earthly existence and bring divine insight into their lives. Here's the part that might make you pause. Many people believe that ancient spiritual practices were solely about external rituals, like offerings or sacrifices. But this festival showed that, in India's spiritual traditions, there was a deep emphasis on internal transformation. The darkness wasn't something to fear. It was a place to reflect, to learn, and to spiritually renew oneself. It was a time to be still and connect with the universe in a way that was beyond the physical world. Now, this might sound somewhat radical, but what if I told you that many of these beliefs still resonate today? You see, the idea of finding light in the darkness is a concept that runs through much of human philosophy and religion. It is echoed in everything from Buddhist teachings to the world's major religious traditions. The fact that this ancient festival was centered around darkness and the potential for enlightenment speaks to a universal human experience. In addition to the meditations and rituals, the festival also had a very practical side. The participants believed that their acts of devotion would influence the natural world around them. By participating in the ritual of waiting for the first star, they were, in their minds, affecting cosmic forces. The actions of humans were not separate from the universe. They were intimately linked, and this festival was a reminder that every thought, word, and action carried spiritual weight. It's fascinating to think about how these festivals, despite seeming strange from a modern perspective, were not just moments of spiritual expression. They were deeply tied to the survival and understanding of the people's environment. The cycle of day and night, light and dark, wasn't just symbolic. It was a part of their everyday life. Without a deep understanding of the natural world, the spiritual world would have felt incomplete. Let's pause here to think about this. Most people today see spiritual festivals as times of joy and celebration, but ancient Indian festivals often carried much more profound meanings. They were a way to bridge the human world with the divine, a way to show that the world's cycles, whether of the stars, seasons, or life itself, were interconnected with the God's will. So, as you reflect on these ancient practices, you might find yourself asking, how often do we take time to pause, to reflect, to be in the darkness, both literally and metaphorically? And just like the people who celebrated the Night of No Stars, do we see darkness as a moment for enlightenment, or is it something we fear and avoid? In the next section, we'll move from the cosmic rituals to something even more grounded, the sacred animal procession, where animals themselves were seen as divine messengers. But before we dive into that, think about this. How do we, in modern times, approach the intersection of life, death, and spiritual growth? After exploring the fascinating and sometimes mind-boggling festivals of ancient India, you've likely come to realize just how intricate and multi-dimensional these celebrations were. They weren't just parties or events. They were profound expressions of spirituality, life, and death itself. Let's take a step back and reflect on what we've uncovered. What might have seemed strange or extreme at first glance actually had deep-rooted cultural, spiritual, and philosophical meanings. These festivals were ways for ancient people to connect with their gods, their ancestors, and the cycles of nature. They weren't just about the spectacle, the rituals, or the costumes. They were about transcending the physical world and stepping into a space where the divine and the mortal met. We started with the festival of of the dead, which blurred the lines between the living and the departed. Through mock funerals and offerings to spirits, people ensured that their loved ones found peace in the afterlife. But that was just the beginning. From there, we ventured into the chariot of fire, where gods themselves were believed to travel through the streets, riding in grand chariots pulled by the faithful. The people's devotion was so intense that they threw themselves under the wheels of the chariot in the hope of receiving blessings. Then came the rites of passage, where young adults proved their courage by walking barefoot on hot coals in the hope of achieving immortality. These trials were nothing less than life-defining moments, not just for the individual, but for the entire community. But spiritual growth didn't end there. The dance of madness showed how belief in divine possession could push the body to extremes in search of a deeper connection with the gods. And even when it came to something as seemingly mundane as water fights, the great water fights turned into a spiritual cleansing of sins and misdeeds. We even saw that survival was directly linked to spirituality, where sacrifices to the gods, whether animal or human, were believed to ensure good harvests or military victories. The harvest sacrifice demonstrated just how intertwined life and death were for these ancient communities. Similarly, festivals like the Firewalkers' Feast proved that faith had the power to transcend the most dangerous of physical trials. But it's when we looked at the celestial celebrations, like the Night of No Stars, that we truly saw how people connected with the cosmos. Waiting in darkness for the first star to rise wasn't just about cosmic alignment. It was a deep meditation on the cycles of life and death, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is the possibility for spiritual rebirth. The sacred animal procession offered a glimpse into the sacredness of nature. Elephants, snakes, and tigers were paraded through the streets, not just as animals, but as divine beings, symbols of the gods' power. Similarly, the deadly dance of the Shiva devotees was a powerful reminder that creation and destruction were two sides of the same divine coin. What's truly remarkable about these festivals is that they weren't isolated moments of human eccentricity. They were deeply connected to the rhythms of nature, to the cycles of life, and to the never-ending quest for spiritual understanding. Each festival offered a different lens through which to view the world, but they all shared one common thread: the pursuit of divine connection, whether through sacrifice, devotion, or transcendence. So, as you reflect on these wild and unimaginable festivals, think about the deeper meanings behind them. How does your own worldview align or differ from the ancient Indian perspective on life, death, and spirituality? In modern times, we often celebrate with joy and festivity, but these ancient festivals were celebrations of life's deeper mysteries, reminders that there's more to our existence than meets the eye. In the end, these festivals show us that what might seem like bizarre or extreme acts are, in fact, deeply human ways of connecting with something greater than ourselves. They were a powerful expression of belief, and they helped shape not only the religious practices of ancient India, but also their worldview, a worldview that still influences millions today. The craziest part? These festivals, while often startling and extreme, weren't just about the spectacle. They were moments of deep spiritual awakening, and they still echo in the practices of today's religious and cultural celebrations. What you thought were wild, eccentric festivals may in the end reveal something universal about the human quest for meaning and connection. So what does this mean for us today? Are there aspects of these ancient festivals that we can still learn from or incorporate into our own spiritual practices? The journey of discovery never really ends. It only transforms. As we close this exploration, think about what ancient India can teach us about connecting with the divine in our own lives. Even if these festivals seem outlandish, they remind us that there's always more to discover when it comes to faith, culture, and the human spirit. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.